In the affluent hills of Pacific Palisades, California, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sprawling villa perched on Ocean View Drive. The estate overlooked the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean where waves crashed rhythmically against the cliffs below. Palm trees swayed gently in the sea breeze, rustling the sheer curtains that framed the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air carried the faint scent of salt and eucalyptus, a reminder of the luxurious isolation that defined this neighborhood. Caleb Morrison knelt on the cool marble floor of the grand foyer, his calloused hands scrubbing away invisible stains around the base of the spiral staircase. At 42, he had taken up janitorial work for the wealthy residents here, a job that paid by the hour and allowed him the flexibility he desperately needed. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on in the cramped apartment he rented in a less glamorous part of Los Angeles, where the rent was affordable, but the walls were thin and the air often thick with smog. There, his 10-year-old daughter Emma waited for him each evening, her small frame curled up on the worn sofa with a book or her inhaler close at hand. Emma suffered from mild asthma, a condition that flared up unpredictably, especially during the dry Santa Ana winds that swept through the city. The medical bills had piled up since Caleb's wife, Laura, passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. Laura's treatment had drained their savings, leaving Caleb with debts that seemed insurmountable. He had once dreamed of pursuing a career as a guitarist, playing in small venues around L.A., but those ambitions had been shelved the moment Emma was diagnosed. Now his days revolved around odd jobs like this one, ensuring he could afford her medications and the occasional doctor's visit. Every scrub of the floor was a step toward keeping her healthy, a silent promise he made to himself each morning. With wireless earbuds in place, Caleb turned up the volume slightly on Moon River, the melody a soothing escape from the monotony. He moved methodically, his mind drifting to Emma's latest checkup. The doctor had warned about potential complications if they couldn't afford better air quality or preventive care. As he polished the marble to a shine, his eyes wandered to the expansive living room adjacent to the foyer. There, dominating the wall, hung a large oil portrait in an ornate Italian-carved wooden frame. It depicted a boy of about 6 with golden hair catching imagined light, piercing blue eyes like frozen lakes, and a tentative smile that barely parted his lips. He wore a crisp white shirt and overalls, standing beside a pristine white grand piano, his small hands resting on the keys as if listening to a faded tune. Caleb froze. He stood slowly removing his gloves and approached the painting. His heart pounded erratically, a surge of memories flooding back. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the frame, his eyes welling up. The boy in the portrait was unmistakable Nathan, the child he had known from the Sunshine Orphanage in East Los Angeles. But Caleb knew the truth. That wasn't Nathan. It was Elliot Whitaker. A sharp voice sliced through the silence from behind him. "What are you doing?" Caleb spun around. Standing there was Isabel Whitaker, the villa's owner, a renowned Hollywood director in her late 30s. Her golden hair, the color of aged champagne, fell loosely over a high-end cashmere dress. A Breguet watch gleamed on her wrist as she held a steaming cappuccino. Her expression a mix of annoyance and curiosity, the same steely gaze that commanded film sets and intimidated reporters. Caleb swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. "Ma'am?" "The boy in this painting." Isabel frowned, stepping closer. "He lived with me once, at the Sunshine Orphanage in East L.A. His name was Nathan there. But I know he was Elliot Whitaker." The words hung in the air like shattered crystal. Isabel blinked, her composure cracking. The cappuccino slipped from her grasp, crashing onto the marble floor. Shards of porcelain scattered and hot coffee splashed across the rug. But she didn't move. Her eyes locked onto Caleb's weathered face, searching for deception or madness. "You... what?" she whispered. Caleb nodded, his own eyes misting over. "I was the oldest kid there. We shared everything for 8 years. He always talked about a house by the sea, a white piano, and a sister named Sophie." Isabel staggered back, clutching the arm of a nearby chair. "Sophie! That's what he called me when we were little." For the first time in 3 decades, tears welled in the eyes of the unbreakable director. She sank into the chair, the weight of lost years crashing down. No longer the powerhouse of Hollywood, she was just a sister who had never said goodbye. As the shards of porcelain lay scattered across the marble floor, mingling with the spilled cappuccino, Isabel Whitaker gestured weakly toward the sofa opposite her. "Sit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with the vulnerability that clashed with her polished exterior. Caleb hesitated, glancing at the mess he'd have to clean later, but complied, perching on the edge of the cushion like an intruder in this world of opulence. "Tell me everything," Isabel urged, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "All of it." Caleb nodded, reaching into the pocket of his work jacket. He pulled out a faded piece of paper creased from years of careful folding. It was a child's drawing in crayon, a girl with flowing golden hair standing beside a white piano, a house with ocean views in the background. "Elliot drew this when he was 7, Caleb explained, his voice steady, but thick with emotion. "He gave it to me and said, 'Keep it safe. One day you'll help me find my way back.'" Isabel took the drawing with trembling fingers. Her breath caught as she traced the lines. "That's me," she murmured. "The hair, the dress. I was 8. He remembered every detail." Tears spilled anew, carving silent paths down her cheeks. For a woman who commanded multi-million-dollar film sets, this raw exposure felt foreign, yet undeniable. Caleb leaned forward, his own memories surfacing like waves crashing against forgotten shores. He recounted how Elliot had arrived at the Sunshine Orphanage in East Los Angeles, a scrawny 6-year-old with no records, no family, and a haunted look in his eyes. The staff renamed him Nathan for paperwork's sake, but the boy refused it. "I'm Elliot Whitaker," he'd insist over and over to anyone who would listen. Most dismissed him as delusional, but Caleb, the oldest orphan at the time, believed him. They became inseparable. Caleb, already a teenager hardened by the system, shielded Elliot from the taunts of other kids. They shared meals, bunk beds, and secrets under the dim lights of the dormitory. Elliot spoke endlessly of his old life, a house by the sea, a white grand piano where he'd plink out simple tunes, and a sister named Sophie who called him Nugget because he was her little golden treasure. "No one else knew that nickname," Isabel interjected, her voice cracking. "It was our secret." Caleb nodded, his mind drifting to parallels in his own life. Like Elliot, he'd lost everything young, his parents to a car accident, forcing him into the orphanage. Now, as a single father, he fought daily battles for Emma. The asthma attacks came without warning, triggered by the moldy air in their rundown apartment or the pollution from nearby freeways. Medical bills stacked up like unpaid debts from Laura's cancer fight, which had left him widowed and drowning in grief. He'd traded his guitar dreams for steady janitorial work, skipping meals to afford Emma's inhalers. "Elliot's stories kept me going back then," Caleb admitted. "He never gave up hope. It made me believe in second chances for him and now for Emma." Isabel listened intently, her director's poise crumbling. She rose and crossed to a hidden safe behind a bookshelf, unlocking it with a code. From inside, she retrieved a thick file, decades of search reports, private investigator notes, and faded photos. "This is everything I've gathered over 30 years, she said, spreading it on the coffee table. The police, the media, they all failed. Elliot vanished from Griffith Park in 1995, just 15 minutes while I turned away." Caleb pored over the documents, his finger pausing on a missing persons flyer with Elliot's young face. He shared more Elliot's second disappearance at 14 after a brutal argument with orphanage manager Edgar Willis. The man had beaten him for lying about his identity. That night, the window was left open and Elliot was gone. Caleb had searched for 5 years, posting flyers, hounding police stations, but a poor orphan's plea fell on deaf ears. As they compared notes, patterns emerged: mismatched identities, bureaucratic oversights. They were two strangers bound by one lost boy. Isabel looked at Caleb, her eyes searching. "What scares you the most about this?" He met her gaze, thinking of Emma's labored breaths during her last flare-up, the fear of losing her like he'd lost Laura. "That he's not alive anymore," Caleb replied softly. "Or that he is, but doesn't want to come back, like he's forgotten what home feels like." Isabel nodded, a shared silence enveloping them. For the first time, the villa felt less like a fortress and more like a bridge to the past. 3 days had passed since the shattered cappuccino cup lay forgotten on the marble floor. Isabel had insisted Caleb stay on at the villa, not as a janitor, but as a partner in unraveling the mystery of her brother's disappearance. He agreed, though his mind wandered constantly to Emma back in their dingy apartment. The place was a far cry from the opulent estates. He cleaned walls stained with water damage from leaky pipes, air thick with dust that aggravated her asthma. Last week's flare-up had cost him an emergency room visit he could barely afford, adding to the mountain of bills from Laura's final months. Caleb worked extra hours whenever possible, skipping his own meals to ensure Emma's prescriptions were filled, but the strain was etching deeper lines into his face. In Isabel's home office, sunlight filtered through the blinds, illuminating stacks of yellowed files and glowing computer screens. Isabel pulled up digital archives of missing persons reports, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Hundreds of kids vanished in the 90s with incomplete records, she said, her voice steady but edged with frustration. If Elliot was renamed Nathan, without proper documentation, no fingerprints, no guardians, it could explain why he slipped through the cracks. Maybe someone buried his file on purpose. Caleb nodded, scanning a report on orphanage oversights. "There's someone who might know more," he offered. "Gloria Hayes, an old nurse from Sunshine. She was kind to us kids, slipped us extra snacks when the staff wasn't looking. She's in a nursing home in Santa Monica now." They drove there that afternoon, the coastal highway winding past beaches where families picnicked under clear skies. Caleb gripped the wheel, his thoughts on Emma. The apartment's moldy corners made her wheeze at night. He'd promised her a better place someday, but dreams of stability felt as distant as his abandoned guitar-gathering dust in the closet. At the nursing home, Gloria, now in her 80s with a foggy memory, sat in a sunlit common room. Caleb showed her Elliot's old crayon drawing, and her eyes sharpened. "I remember that boy," Gloria said slowly, her wrinkled hands tracing the paper. "Those blue eyes. Always talking about his real home, his sister. Never believed he belonged there." She paused, glancing around as if the walls might listen. "The night he vanished, I heard shouting from the office. Elliot yelling at Edgar Willis, the manager. I'm not Nathan, I have a sister, Sophie. Edgar lost his temper, hit the kid. Next morning, the boy was gone. No police called. Edgar said he ran away. Isabel leaned forward. Where's Edgar now? Fired a year later for beating other kids. Disappeared after that. No one asked questions orphanages back then. Irene, they swept things under the rug. On the drive back, traffic crawled along the freeway, the ocean a distant shimmer. Isabel stared out the window, her fear spilling out. What if he's dead, or alive but so broken he doesn't want this life anymore? Caleb glanced at her, his own scars surfacing. I almost lost Emma once, he confessed. Asthma attack hit hard, rushed her to the ER at 2 a.m. Doctors said if we'd waited longer. But I held her hand through it all. Fatherhood isn't about blood. It's about showing up. If Elliot's out there, he'll remember that pull toward home. They stopped at Caleb's apartment on the way. The building was run-down graffiti on the walls and a flickering hallway light. Emma opened the door, her brown hair tied in pigtails, a slight wheeze in her breath from the damp air. Dad, you're late, she said, hugging him tightly. She eyed Isabel curiously. Caleb knelt to her level. I was helping find someone, a brother I once had at the orphanage. Emma's eyes widened. Like a family. Something like that, he replied, ruffling her hair. As Isabel watched, a ping sounded on her phone, a reply from a nonprofit in Sacramento. Attached was a photo, a homeless man sketching on a sidewalk with chalk. His drawings mirroring Elliot's childhood memories, a white house by the sea, a piano, a golden-haired girl. The caption read, known as the ghost artist, seen around Greyhound stations. Isabel's hand flew to her mouth. It's him. The style. It's Elliot's. The email from the Sacramento nonprofit had ignited a fragile spark of hope, but the drive north felt interminable. Isabel sat in the passenger seat of Caleb's battered pickup truck, her designer sunglasses doing little to hide the exhaustion etched around her eyes. Caleb gripped the wheel, his thoughts divided between the road ahead and the voicemail he'd left for Emma's sitter. Make sure she takes her inhaler before bed. He'd set his voice steady, despite the knot in his chest. The asthma had been flaring up more frequently lately, the damp apartment air turning every cough into a reminder of his inadequacies as a provider. Laura's death had left him not just heartbroken, but buried in medical debt, forcing him to choose between rent and specialist visits. Finding Elliot wasn't just about Isabel's brother. It was a chance to prove to himself that lost things could be reclaimed for Emma's sake as much as anyone's. They arrived in Sacramento by midday, the city a blur of urban sprawl under a hazy sky. Following the nonprofit's leads, they navigated to a modest church near the Greyhound bus terminal, its steeple casting a long shadow over the sidewalk. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and faint incense. A volunteer, an elderly man with the kind face, led them to the back office after hearing their story. The ghost artist, he said, nodding solemnly. He slept on our benches for months, drew on the sidewalks with chalk always the same scenes, a beach house, a piano, a girl with golden hair. We called him Nate. Quiet guy, never caused trouble. Isabel's breath hitched. Did he leave anything behind? The volunteer rummaged in a storage closet and produced a rusted iron box, its surface pitted with age. This! He said if anyone came looking, give it to them. No one ever did until now. Caleb pried open the lid with careful hands. Inside lay a collection of treasures, faded chalk sketches rolled into tubes, handwritten notes scrawled on scraps of paper, and, at the bottom, a yellowed photograph. It showed a young girl, Isabel as a child, standing beside a boy with matching blue eyes, both grinning beside a white piano. Isabel clutched the photo to her chest. tears streaming down her face. "He kept it all these years," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He never forgot." Caleb unfolded one of the notes, his eyes scanning the shaky handwriting ramblings about a sister named Sophie, a house by the sea, and a promise to return. Tucked among them was a hand-drawn map, crude but clear, marking a route to an old motel complex near the Fresno Industrial District. "This is it," Caleb said, his voice firm. "He's pointing us right to him." The discovery fueled him, reminding him of Emma's own drawings, simple sketches she made during asthma episodes to distract from the wheezing. If he could reunite this family, perhaps it would bring some light to his own struggles. They pressed on to Fresno that evening, the sun dipping low as they pulled in the motel's cracked parking lot. The place was a relic, peeling paint on the walls, flickering neon signs advertising vacancies. Room 17 bore a faded label, Nathan Morris. Isabel stood before the door, her hand hovering. Caleb nodded encouragement, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and fear for what if. This ended in more loss. She knocked 3 times, the sound echoing in the quiet dusk. The door creaked open. A gaunt man in his mid-30s appeared, his beard, unkempt hair, long and tangled, clad in a threadbare sweater. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes, met hers, widening in disbelief. Isabel's voice trembled. "Elliot, it's me, Sophie!" The man froze, his face paling as if seeing a ghost. "Sophie!" he rasped, stepping back against the wall. You're alive." Tears welled, instantly spilling down his weathered cheeks. He slid to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Isabel knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms. "I'm here to take you home," she said, her own sobs mingling with his. "I've looked for you every day." Caleb watched from the threshold, a swell of emotion choking him. He'd kept his promise, searched through the years of hardship. As the siblings clung to each other, he thought of Emma waiting at home and whispered a silent vow to keep fighting for her, too. 1 year had slipped by like the gentle tides along the Malibu shore, transforming the fragments of broken lives into something whole. Elliot Whitaker, no longer Nathan Morris or the ghost artist, had settled into a modest cottage on a bluff overlooking the ocean, just a short walk from Isabel's villa. The nonprofit's connections had helped verify his identity through old dental records and faded scars, confirming what the heart already knew. Now he spent his days as an artist, his chalk sketches evolving into vibrant canvases sold in local galleries. The proceeds funded therapy sessions that mended the decades of wandering and loss, allowing him to reclaim the boy who once dreamed by a white piano. Caleb still worked for Isabel, but her role had shifted from janitor to trusted estate manager, overseeing the properties with a quiet efficiency born of necessity. The change brought stability he hadn't known since Laura's passing. Isabel, moved by Caleb's story, had quietly covered Emma's medical expenses, a specialist in pediatric pulmonology, new inhalers, and even allergy testing that pinpointed environmental triggers. The damp apartment in Los Angeles was a memory. They now lived in a cozy bungalow Isabel had rented out at a nominal fee, its fresh air and ocean views easing Emma's asthma. No more midnight wheezes or emergency runs to the ER. Caleb's debts were easing too, though he insisted on paying what he could, his pride intact amid the gratitude. Emma thrived in this new world. At 11, her brown curls bounced as she skipped between the homes, her laughter a melody that filled the salty air. She spent afternoons in Elliot's studio, learning to blend colors and capture light on paper. Uncle Elliot, she'd call him, her small hands smudged with pastels. To Isabel, she was Aunt Sophie. a title that bridged the gap between stranger and family. Emma's drawings often featured the four of them, simple figures, under palm trees, a testament to the bonds forming beyond blood. One golden afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Isabel entered Elliot's cottage with a worn sheet of music in hand. It was their mother's favorite piece, a lullaby she'd played on the white piano before illness claimed her. "I found this in the attic," Isabel said softly, placing it on the music stand. The piano, salvaged from storage and tuned to perfection, gleamed in the warm light. Elliot sat at the bench, his fingers hesitating over the keys. Then slowly the notes flowed, a haunting melody that echoed through the open windows, carrying out to the sea. Isabel stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, tears glistening as memories resurfaced, childhood evenings filled with music before the park, before the void. Caleb arrived at the door, drawn by the sound. He leaned against the frame, his eyes misting. Emma slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. "Family," Caleb murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "isn't where you're born. It's where someone waits for you to come home." Elliot turned from the piano, his blue eyes meeting Caleb's. "Thank you," he said simply, "for never forgetting me. For searching when no one else would." He rose and retrieved a fresh canvas from the corner, a gift for Emma. It depicted a girl with brown curls standing by the sea waves lapping at her feet, a symbol of new beginnings. On the mantel in Isabel's villa, the old portrait of young Elliot now hung beside a new one. New one, four figures, Caleb with his weathered smile, Emma's joyful grin, Isabel's graceful poise, and Elliot's thoughtful gaze standing under swaying palms by the beach. Beneath it, in Elliot's elegant script, family isn't the question of who gave you life, but who stayed. As dusk settled, they gathered in the bluff, watching the sun melt into the ocean. Waves whispered secrets to the shore, and the air hummed with unspoken peace. Caleb wrapped an arm around Emma, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. No wheeze, no fear. For the first time since Laura's passing, hope felt tangible, a promise that even in hardship, love could rebuild what was lost. They weren't bound by blood, but by choice, the most enduring tie of all.